Hi, everybody. Our Castelar family, friends, and of course, our students. We have actually a very special presentation today. Our 6th and 7th grade students are going to interview the author, Naomi Hirahara, and we are very excited to have her here. So as guests of this presentation, if you would like to ask questions in the chat, I just ask that you remember that we have to be respectful and to ask questions that is, that's appropriate. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. 6th and 7th graders, go ahead and start.
Hi. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge the Tongva people, who were the original inhabitants of the land where Los Angeles and our school Castelar is located. We honor the Tongva and all indigenous people, past, present, and future. We also honor the contributions of the Black community and recognize that our country was built upon the labor of enslaved people.
This month is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and we not only recognize their contributions to the history, culture, and achievements of the United States, we encourage all of you to continue learning about underrepresented groups in our country and around the world.
Welcome to our Latest Faces Presents program, where we try to introduce you to people who are doing inspiring things in their lives and careers. Today, we bring you author and advocate Naomi Hirahara.
Thanks for having me.
Naomi Hirahara was born in Pasadena, California, where her parents moved after the Hiroshima bombing. Naomi went to Stanford University to get her bachelor's degree and studied at the Inter-University Center for Advanced Japanese Language Studios in Tokyo. After graduating college, she became a reporter and editor for the Rafu Shimpo and served as a Milton Center Fellow in Creative Writing at Newman University in Wichita, Kansas.
After she came back to Southern California from Kansas, she wrote her first mystery novel, Summer of the Big Batchy. The book became a finalist for Barbara Kingsolver's Bellwether Prize and was nominated for a McCavity Mystery Award. Naomi then continued to write novels, many of them also receiving awards. Naomi and her husband Wes now live here in Southern California.
Please give a warm welcome to the great author Naomi Hirahara. Now we have a few questions from our students.
Okay.
What were you like as a student?
In the beginning, like in elementary school, I was kind of a crybaby, and I think I was a perfectionist. So if my teacher told me, "Oh, Naomi, you could do better," I would start crying. So I was, for 8.5 years, I was like an only child. And I think I felt pressure to be perfect. So I think some of that played, and my mother is an immigrant from Japan. So I think she was trying to negotiate the world. And since I was American born, I was the person that was supposed to help her. So I don't know if any of you fall in that kind of category. I was kind of a nerd. Like my mother would not let me wear pants to school until like 6th grade. And then I would wear these really funky clothes now Japanese clothing and styles are cool, but back then they weren't cool. And I would, or she would, and now sewing things is really cool, but back then it wasn't that cool. So, and I'm short. So sometimes the clothes didn't fit me off the rack. So my mom, made it. So I always loved to write though. And what I would do in the summertime, I liked having a lot of time to myself. And I would try to write like a novel or, during the summer. So that was like the most fun for me. Now later, when I got older, I started playing basketball. You probably know these Japanese leagues. So I started playing those leagues. I was a Pasadena Bruin. And before I was like, I seemed uncoordinated and everything. And then all of a sudden, when I started playing those in the Pasadena leagues, even though I was small, I was quick. So I could steal the basketballs and all that. So I really started to like sports. I love to read all the time. I hung out, I was one of those kids, in the summertime, I would borrow all these books from the library. And I loved reading. I love to travel through books. So that's the kind of student I was. Yeah.
How did you decide to become a writer? What inspires you to write?
I think, first of all, I love to read so much. So that I like the fact that you can be whoever you want to be. When you write, like if you're an actor, especially if you're in the movies, you can't escape your physical shape, right? But when you write, you can be anything you want to be. So that's really cool to me. I'm trying to think if I didn't like to speak in public that much. So writing was easier for me to express myself. And so I like the fact that I have a voice through my words on the page. And I also love stories. I just love, learning about different places, through stories.
Are your books inspired by your own experiences?
Yes, I think what was pretty important to me is after I graduated college and I spent a year in Japan, um, I I kind of switched. I thought that like my mother wanted me to be like a lawyer, and I was thinking, oh, I'll take my degree and then went to Japan, and after that I'll go to law school. But the one problem was I don't like to have conflict. I don't like to argue with people. And if you want to be a lawyer, that's what you have to do. Now, repeat the question again. I lost my train of thought. What was the question? Can you repeat the question?
Are your books inspired
Oh,
by your own experience?
okay. So when I came back, but when I went to Japan, I figured out, oh, I really want to be a writer. And so I didn't have the experience. Sometimes when you go to college, you get these fancy internships in the summer, and I didn't do any of that. So when I came back, I got a job in the presentation, it said Rafu Shimpo. And Rafu, I mean, maybe one of you guys know, that's the old name for Los Angeles, right? So do you all know this? And so the rafu was taken actually from Chinese, Cantonese, it must be, right? So that's Los Angeles newspaper, and it was started in 1903. So when I first started working there, it's in Little Tokyo. I didn't think it was cool. I was like, oh, I went to a fancy university and now I'm like working at this very community newspaper. But it turns out that was like the best decision I ever made, because since it was small, I got to do so many different things. And it was a time in our community's history that it was very important to get things in the paper. So it was a time too, like when you write for the newspaper, a lot of people criticize you, and get mad at you. But then on the staff, you're kind of like a team, like you're all together. So even though people complain, it's like, well, we're trying to do the best work we can. And this was all before like the internet. So these days we're all criticized, right, on the internet. But because of my training as a journalist, I think I'm a little better at taking criticism. But remember what I was telling you when I was little? Like someone said, my teacher said, you can do better. And I started crying. And then all of a sudden, I'm in the middle of this thing and strangers are criticizing me. So I started to change and I started to get less sensitive and I got a tougher skin. So it's possible to do that. So yeah. Oh, I didn't even answer the question. So I'll do it real quick. So I think writing about the Japanese American community helped me to gain stories. So I get a lot of stories from that experience of being a reporter. But yes, a lot some things definitely are from my family. Like my dad, he was a gardener. He was also an atomic bomb survivor. And I felt like people like underestimated him. And he was also an American in Japan. So it's kind of an interesting story. So that's why I created a sleuth. I don't know if you remember, there was, I'm trying to think of, it's not like Sherlock Holmes. It's like more, it's more like ordinary sleuth that detective that solves a mystery. So I made a person like my father, an old Japanese gardener, like the person who solves all the crimes. So that's kind of based on my father, not exactly like my father, but based on my father.
Alex can't speak, so let me ask you his question. He asked, are the people in your books similar to the people you know in real life? And you kind of addressed that question.
I will say this, I think when you're a writer, like every character kind of has to be you. So even the villain, even the bad person, you have to kind of be honest with yourself. You can't be fake. You got to go, there's things that are bad about me, and I'm going to kind of access it when I write about the villain. So if the villain is insecure, you kind of tap into that insecure part of you. If they're very selfish, you try to make connections that way.
There's a next student. There she is. Okay, go ahead, sweetheart. Go ahead and unmute.
What are some things you think about when you are writing a book?
That's a really good question. What needs to happen, and you probably heard this from other people, like when you're creating characters, they kind of have to take over and they kind of have to have a life of their own. And pretty soon you're not thinking that much. You're just kind of following them. Because I think sometimes if you think too much, you might push a character. You say, okay, this character, has to fall down a manhole and I'm going to have to figure out a way, sometimes you're forcing it and your character becomes, what I say, becomes flat, like a paper doll. And you want your character fully fleshed out. So that's why there needs to be a point in your creativity where you've created some interesting concrete details, you've created weaknesses in your character, you've created some backstory, and pretty soon they're telling you things. So it sounds weird, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the next person, he lagged out. So let me ask the question for him. How long does it usually take for you to write and complete a book?
It really depends. But my first book, Summer of the Big Bachi, and bachi means what in this is old time Japanese, what comes around goes around. What goes around comes around. And it's kind of like a bad karma. But that book from the time I thought of it to it actually being published took 15 years. So some of you are 15 years old, but I think some of it was because I was ambitious. I was writing about an old man, and I was like in my 20s. And one friend told me, he complimented me to write about, try to write about someone older, because you never can be older, right? I mean, there comes a time you can be the same age as your old protagonist, but I never had that experience of being that certain age. So it was more based on observation and imagining. And I wrote a male character, so that's different than who I am. So I think all of those things, and I said it, I was taking on the atomic bombing, during World War. That's like a kind of a huge topic. So I think that's why it took me that long. But I was in a lot of writing groups at UCLA, so I went through that whole process. So I know it's crazy, but it was almost like an obsession. And I think when you write something, it has to mean something to you. It doesn't have to be super serious, but you need to have some kind of passion about it. Because if you don't, it's like, it's flat, it's not interesting. But other books, usually now a book will take me about a year to write.
Andrea?
Do you collaborate with anyone on writing books, or is it just you?
For fiction, nonfiction rather, I've collaborated with friends. And the way we've done it, sometimes we write alternating chapters, or sometimes I'll write the show, another person will write the first part and I'll write the second part. So those are a couple ways. I've done like history books where my partner, she did all the interviews, and I took the interviews and made it into a story or narrative. So we had kind of different roles. I've never tried to write fiction. I think that would be really hard to write a book, a novel, because there's something called voice, which I say it's kind of like the personality of your writing. It's very singular. It represents like one person. So I think it'd be really hard to do that. But in movies, right? When you watch a movie, you see like screenplay by, and there could be like three. Sometimes if there's too many names, it kind of means it's a bad movie because somebody wasn't able to write a good screenplay, and all these other people come in and try to fix it. So I think writing a screenplay is more collaborative, but making a movie, you have all these different voices. So it's very different than writing a book.
Have you ever gotten stuck on a writer's block? If so, how did you continue?
I don't really get writer's block too much, but I had a problem during the pandemic. I had a book due, and I think because even though my daily routine in terms of writing wasn't that difficult, I write at home. Some people write at like coffee houses, so that disrupted their, writing process, but I just write at home. But just knowing that terrible things were happening outside of our house affected me. So I knew that I couldn't write, I had to adjust my expectations. So I didn't write as many words as I usually do. And have you guys heard of the Pomodoro method of writing? Or so Pomodoro refers to, there used to be this timer that's shaped like a tomato. They call it Pomodoro. So what they do, so that refers to setting it at a certain time, like, and you might try this, 25 minutes. And then for 25 minutes, you're totally focused on what you're writing on. You don't think about anything else. You don't look at social media. You don't look at your phone. And then you take a break for 5 minutes, and you could go to the bathroom and then you go back and do 25 minutes again. So that very focused, chunks that really helped me. And I'm a morning person. So what I do, I have a friend, and we go on Twitter, like DMs, 8 o'clock in the morning from Monday through Friday. And we DM each other. It's like maybe 5 minutes before, how are you doing? Do small talk. And we don't do it like FaceTime or anything, because we don't want to worry about how we look, and I don't know why we do it through Twitter, but anyway. And then and when it goes, the clock says 8, we say go. And then we just go into our projects and write. And then when it's like 8:25, we say stop. Like, how many words did you get? Blah, 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 blah. So that has really, really helped me. And it's kind of nice that I get some things down in the morning with her. And then later on, I could go back and do my, write on my own. But I recommend that for anyone who feels a little stuck. And what I always tell people too, if they feel stuck, to start writing, I am stuck. I don't know what to do, blah, blah, blah. If you start writing that, somehow other things start to come out from that point. So I would say, don't just accept it, don't fight it so much. And then your subconscious will kind of take over.
Thank you. Jasper, are you ready? Is it difficult to get a book published?
It depends if you want to self-publish, because self-publishing since like 2012 has gotten very popular. And a lot of that's more ebooks, although you can self-publish, printing too, and there's a lot of different options. But what's really interesting, this is one of the things from the pandemic. A lot of printers went out of business. So it's harder than it was before just to get paper, to get a book printed, physically printed. And some of even established publishers are kind of worried, about that. So, but in terms of ebooks, you probably all know this better than I do, but yeah, it's not difficult to do it. I am an old person, so I'm like traditionally published. So I work with publishers large and small. I have my own micro press that I do smaller projects with too. But what's difficult with traditional, like, unfortunately, there's only like five publishers in New York now, because everything's consolidated, merging together. And you need usually, unless you're a celebrity, you need an agent. And to get an agent is very, very difficult. It's almost harder than getting a book deal. So, and a lot of it is, it could be luck. But what agents are looking for is a fresh voice. So, I kind of went over that before. It's kind of like a new kind of, this is a wonderful thing about writing. If you're kind of a quirky person with a kind of weird personality, it's yay for you, because that's what writers want. I mean, agents want. They want something fresh and different. So, yeah. So once, this is another thing. If you write a novel, this is your first novel, if you want to be traditionally published, you usually have to finish the whole book. You don't get paid or anything. You finish the whole book, then you get an agent interested. If they're interested, they always say, make these changes, you make the changes, and then your agent will take your manuscript to different places, and hopefully they'll sell, but sometimes it doesn't, so many times it's not your first manuscript that sells, it's like one down the line. So yeah, so it's a hard profession, but the thing that's kind of fun, and I write mysteries, right? I write 1001 Cranes wasn't a mystery, but a lot of my books for adults are mystery. And the good thing about that is it's just like, science fiction or fantasy romance. You have an established readership, and those readers, they just go through so many books because they love, they get hooked. So that's one of the good things about writing genre, is that there's rabid readers out there. But what's fun for me is too is right now, so many like shows you watch on Netflix, or whatever, they're usually adapted from books. That's just the trend. So it's very hard, it's even harder, right, to get a movie made or a series made. But it's kind of cool if you as a writer, create something and then it's kind of adapted, and you don't have to get involved in all that. You could just see how somebody is influenced by your work and creates, something for the screen. So that's exciting right now.
Now we
So
have some questions about your book, 1001 Cranes.
What inspired you to create the character Angela?
I think some of it I did relate to her, because like Angela is the only child, but like I said, I was the only child for 8.5 years. And I think I could kind of relate to like things happening around me and nobody kind of explaining what was going on. And so I would have to, I don't know if you heard of the term, like, walking through a minefield. Like with a minefield, right, there's mines underneath the ground and you don't know where to step. And sometimes you step in the wrong place and there's an explosion, right? So I wanted to kind of create a character who was kind of in that situation. And I don't know, I'll wait to see what other people ask. So I could say more, but I'll wait.
ooh, Sophie?
What advice do you have for young writers?
I would say just, write regularly, and just experiment, write, and like what I said before, write what you're passionate about, write what you're afraid of, because I think it's important to be risky, and that's going to be different for every person. So maybe there's something you're kind of afraid of, I would encourage you to try to experiment with that a little bit. And nobody has to read your work. It's like it could be your thing, so and I would say a lot of times, and I've done led writing workshops like on college level. And some people are so influenced by movies or games, video games, and they want to put that in their book. But sometimes, I don't know if you've heard the word derivative, but it's not original. It's just a knockoff of something else. So somehow you have to put your uniqueness, your experiences inside the story and give it a new twist. So try not to, it's okay, there's people who copy other writings. That's okay because you're learning structure and things. But I think to be really good, you have to put a part of yourself in the work. And it could be fantasy. I'm not saying it has to be straight autobiography. It could be, about wizards or, I don't know, aliens or different kinds of creatures, but still put something about yourself in there.
Awesome. Thank you. Eloise?
How do you select the names of your characters?
That is a really good question. For me, names are super important. Some of my fellow writers, when they write, they just write XXX and they fill in the name later. So some people, they're okay with that. I cannot, if I don't get the right name, my character doesn't start moving in the right in a very free direction. So I consider, okay, I'm trying to think of, sometimes it's silly reasons, and it's like corny reasons, like with, I have a bicycle cop and her name's Ellie Rush. And
Ooh.
it's a pun. So it's like LA, and she's on a bicycle, so LA Rush. So that's kind of corny. So you could be corny, that's all right. One of my characters is named Moss Arai. That's my old gardener. And in Spanish, what does moss mean? It means,
More.
more. He wants more out of my life. My father's nickname was Sam. So you have Sam and Moss. And then that was not intentional. So that's where your subconscious kind of works in. And his last name is Arai. And I was purposely looking for a shorter name. And a lot of Japanese, like my name is long. I was trying to look for a shorter name. And actually it was a family friend. So sometimes a lot of times actually, I steal my friends' names. And a family we grew up with had that name Arai. But then a book club asked, did you name him Arai because things go awry? And I go, no, but that's a good reason. So it's a combination of, all those things, sounds, personal things. And this is what I say, like, to people who are doing series fiction, like Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes. He was considering names like Sherrington Hope. Can you imagine? I mean, Sherlock Holmes would not be popular if his name was Sherrington Hope. So he was taking name, Sherlock, I guess in England is a surname. For some reason, he wanted two surnames. So he was, playing around. So it has to have the right sounds, so I guess play around with their names and see what sounds right.
Abelini?
Why did you decide to make it so that Angela's parents were separated?
I think in my own life, and I won't get into the specifics, I felt kind of like my idea of what a family was not happening. So I kind of wanted to write about that kind of situation, kind of like what you hoped for and dreamt or thought was not, life was taking a detour. So that's why, and I needed a way for her to go to LA because she's from this beautiful area in San Francisco. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's like the Golden Gate Bridge, and then you go on the Golden Gate Bridge, and that area is where Angela was from. And then I don't know if you've ever been to Gardena, California. That was a place where a lot of Japanese Americans used to live. And it's like flat, it's not exciting like San Francisco. So just like the contrast of, so I needed a way for Angela to be away from all the beauty she was used to. So that's another reason why I thought the breakup of her parents' marriage would cause her to go there.
Why did you decide to write 1001 Cranes about folding cranes? Are you also good at origami?
I am. I'm not a great crafter, but one thing my mom did teach me was to do origami. And this is a weird thing, but so my parents really like to go bowling. I know that's not popular now, but they used to every Friday night at All-Star Lanes in the Eagle Rock area, they would go bowling in a league. And I was with another girls about my age. So we would just like, what were we supposed to do? We were young, we were very young. So, but we brought like origami and started folding, so that was like a thing I really like to do. And I just think the fact there's something cultural too, like the lines have to line up, right? If you don't do it carefully, your crane comes out all, messed up. So I think some of that, maybe like when I was little, I felt like I had to be, just so like almost perfect, and maybe the folding was kind of a metaphor, for Angela, like she felt like she had to, follow her grandmother's instructions, to be really accepted or loved, So yeah, and I also, at that time, there was a tradition here, and I think it started in Hawaii. If you made something with 1,001 cranes, it's different than 1,000 cranes. I'm sure you're all familiar with Sadako and 1,000 cranes. And right in Japan, if you're sick or something, you usually fold all those cranes. But it kind of changed in America. So in Hawaii, like you do one more, and it's like more of a happy thing. And I love how culture changes in America. Like some people, don't like it, but to me, it's like, of course it's going to change. It's culture is moving from one place to another. So yeah, and so when I got married, I wish I could show it to you, but someone made me this beautiful 1,000 with these little tiny, it's different than the ones I describe in the book, but she folded, I think she used toothpicks to do these little cranes. She did like 1,001 of them. So I just think that's like really cool. So I wanted to put that in there.
Thank you. Megan asked, have you experienced discrimination in the publishing industry for being Asian American?
That's a really good question. Well, probably one reason, one reason why it took me so long to get published is my character was not expected, like he didn't fit, like he wasn't like this white guy, who was saving the day. He was Asian American, but he was also like working class. So there was other things that were kind of involved. So he wasn't super sexy either. So I think that's one reason why it took me so long to get published. It didn't fit a certain box that people were looking for. I think that, in my genre, they have mystery conventions, and many times, and they would have maybe 1,000 people there, and in terms of even the readers, back then there might be only 2 people who are Asian, myself and another person. And there was one woman who was, like I told you, I was short. She was very tall, and she wasn't a writer, she was a reader, but everyone called us by the other person's name. And a lot of people asked her if she was me. So it was that kind of thing. Sometimes I think that people, when you are from a minority group and you don't have a voice to say certain things, sorry about that. If you don't have a voice to really say things, it's very emotional, so I think at my first time I was on a panel, and then I was, since my character this is the Masarai character, was based on my father, I got super emotional and I started crying. And I think it was just that it was kind of shocking to give voice to my, my community's experience. So, and I think for other people, like they're used to holding court, they're used to people listening to them all the time. So it's no big deal, So that was, I guess that was more of an internal thing that kind of caught me off guard. I was kind of surprised to go through that. But things have changed. So my first novel was published in 2004. And now we have a group called Crime Writers of Color, which was formed maybe like a couple years. Sorry about that. That was formed maybe to, well, it was formed a couple years ago. And I think we have like over 100 members. So this is over 100, and these are, Black, Asian American, Latino, the whole gamut. So, I've really seen this great change, development. So I think for you all, things are looking a lot better. I think also, Asian Americans are, we're part of the consumers. We're consuming these stories. So even people who are white, they have to write for a more diverse audience than they're used to. So I think that's why it gets certain people nervous, like, so a lot of times some people hire sensitivity readers to make sure, like if they're writing outside of their race. But I kind of don't like that term sensitivity, because it seems like, oh, these people of color, they're so sensitive. I think it's just more about research, that you need to know your whatever you're writing, and like in this group, you could be like non-Asian, but you belong to Castelar, Asian Americans, Chinese, a lot, so it's also people's experience too. So I know when I worked at the newspaper, so I can write about these things I write about, not only because I'm Japanese American, but I spent this time learning and talking and interviewing people. So it's not only an issue of ethnicity, but also like commitment, and I think service to people.
Thank you. Now, Kevin. Oh, sorry, Kevin.
What are your thoughts on hate towards Asians?
Terrible. I grew up in a school that was desegregated. A lot of people don't know that Pasadena Unified School District, the Supreme Court said it was it was more the high schools, too segregated. There whites at this school and blacks at this school. So we needed, they mandated busing. So at a young age, I was looking at race, issues of race. And I grew up in a diverse neighborhood. And I went to Japanese school on Saturdays and went to Japanese American church, played Japanese American basketball. So I was kind of in tune to my culture and heritage. So I think all of those things have helped me. And just because I kind of grew up in an area where there were like physical fights, so I even got into a fight myself when I was little, this little person in a skirt. But I have more of that kind of attitude, like, don't mess with me, I'm not gonna, but I was talking to my husband, I was going, do you think I'm kind of in denial? And he was saying yes, so I think I struggle with fear, the issue of, I mean, I do think that Asian Americans, from the beginning of our history, from the time, Chinese people, appeared in America, there's been exclusion, like laws like we can't buy land, all that kind of stuff. So those kind of attitudes are not surprising to me. So, but I kind of, there's a part of me that's kind of rebellious. It's like, I'm not going to let anyone's hatred kind of define what I think about myself. That's more my personality. I don't know, maybe I'm in la la land, but yeah. But I also, I think my husband and I, we like to have conversations with people. So I think that's super important. Not if someone's hating on you, but there's could be like people who don't understand, and you could have conversations. So I think that's really important. And I think another issue is that there's people with mental health issues. And I think, I used to work in Little Tokyo right next to Skid Row. So I'd see a lot of people with, mental health. And sometimes when racism the is fanned, it starts to bleed into like people who are struggling with mental health. Not that everybody who has mental health issues is going to be like that, but so I think it's so complex, but I think it's important to talk about it. And people, a lot of people have all different experiences. Some people's, have been only spent time in white spaces, so they're going to feel different, have different experiences than like all of you, so.
Tammy?
What is one book you suggest we read?
Can you speak a little louder?
What is one book you suggest us we read? What is one book you suggest we read?
That's real. Gosh, that is such a good question. Well, I'm assuming you all are familiar with Jean Leung's book, right? American Born Chinese. Is that what it's called? The graphic novel. Let's see. What was I reading at that time? I'm trying to think. Whoops. You kind of stumped me. There's so many books that are out there. If anyone else, I'm going to keep thinking. So if someone else could ask another question, I'll be trying to think of like a really good book.
Junji, would you like to ask your question, sweetheart?
On average, how long did it take you to write a novel?
It depends. Now it takes about a year.
Okay, anybody else? Eloise, you have a questions? Or Ellie? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, there's a question from one of the attendees. Do you listen to music when you write?
I usually don't, but there's one book that's called Snakeskin Shamisen, and that's based on an instrument that looks like a banjo, and it's the music from Okinawa. So when I wrote that book, I listened to Okinawan music. And then, there's another book, Ellie Rush book called Grave on Grand Avenue. And it's actually about a Chinese cellist. So I picked up Yo-Yo Ma's music and I was listening to that. And this new book that is a historical set in Little Tokyo during World War II was called Bronzeville. So, African Americans from the Deep South, they came to LA to work in like the defense industry during World War II. And Japanese Americans, of course, were taken away, right? They were forcibly removed to camps. And then the Blacks came in, and because there were racial covenants, right? There were places like no Blacks allowed. So then they pointed to Little Tokyo. Oh, there's a place where there's no people. You guys live over there. So it became this place called Bronzeville, and they had all these jazz clubs. So as a result of that, though so I'm kind of writing about a time period, right, a little bit after the height of that. So I'm going to listen to a lot of jazz, from that particular era. So.
Thank you. It is close to 6. Does anybody have any questions? Any last questions for Miss Hirahara?
Another question from one of the attendees. When you write about a place, do you eat it accordingly? Like loco moco when you write about Hawaii, hot dogs in Chicago.
Oh, do I eat it? Yeah, you got to eat it for sure. Like the one that's coming out in August is in Chicago, and there's a lot of Polish people in Chicago. So right there, you guys might know, like around the Glendale area, there's that Polish restaurant called I think it's called Polka. And yeah, you got to eat it. And in the one where I have Iced in Paradise, also in Glendale, there's a good shave ice place. So, to answer the question, this is, I haven't read it in a really long time. This is about the book. A book I really loved to read was Phantom Tollbooth when I was, so I haven't picked it up recently. So I don't know, does it hold up? I haven't read it. It does. Okay. So that's one thing I would recommend.
Another question from, I'm sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, Alivin. What are you working on now?
So I'm just finishing up the second Leilani. So I have a series in Kauai, and it's called the Leilani. Her name's Leilani Santiago. She's Filipina, Japanese, and white. And it's called An Eternal Lay. And I'm just rewriting it right now, but the pandemic kind of made me change the storyline. And now the book is set October 2020 during the pandemic. So it's kind of a bad decision because I think people they won't want to read about the pandemic. But I think in Hawaii, it's different because they were able to control the virus probably better than any other state. And in Kauai, no one died. And the time period I'm writing about, not even one person had died at that time. But I think the pandemic forced the end of decrease of travel, right? No, there were hardly any tourists there. And I think those kind of issues about tourism, sustainability, those are kind of interesting questions to kind of look at. So Leilani and her sisters, that series I call, it's like Little Women in Hawaii with a dead body. Because there's 4 Santiago sisters, and they save a mysterious woman who's floating in Waimea Bay. So but who is this? It's the pandemic. Where did this woman come from? So, and then, so that's, and then I'm contracted. Sometimes in publishing, you do a writer for hire. So that means I don't get any royalties from sales, but I'm going to be doing a book for Running Press, and it's for middle grade, and it's called We Are Here, like 30 inspiring Asian American and Pacific Islander, folks. Yeah. And I had to write 2 sample biography. And they're doing it in conjunction with the Smithsonian. So the Smithsonian has the Asian Pacific American Center. So they'll pick everybody and they'll just tell me you do. And then So me being a journalist really helps. So I did 2 sample bios. One was on Naomi Osaka, and the other one was on Philip Vera Cruz, who was a Filipino labor organizer. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of Chinese Americans in there. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Last question from Emila. Have you ever considered writing a sequel to 1001 Cranes?
Oh, that's a really good question. Right now, I don't think there's enough interest in it. But I will say this. Finally, 1001 Cranes, as well as Iced in Paradise, they will be coming out in Audible. Unfortunately, Audible, they don't release it to libraries, but it'll be coming out in audiobook on the 9th of May. And I'm really excited about that. Yeah, so hopefully maybe the audiobook might get people's attention, but yeah, I haven't really thought about a sequel.
Well, it's 6 now, so thank you so much for being here, and thank you for signing all of our books too. That was cool.
Thanks for having me, and all your questions were excellent.
Thank you. And thank you for teaching us, some of us novices, how to actually fold a crane. We did it as a class, so we did put it to work. Thank you so much for that experience. And Ellie, go ahead.
We want to give a special thanks to Mrs. Liu, Mrs. Marquez, Ms. Karen Lee, and Ms. Wenting Lee for supporting us and our class. And another special thanks to all of the students in this slide to make today successful. And thank you, Naomi, for coming.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody, and weekend.
Oh, one more slide, Michelle.
So, if you liked this one, there's more coming soon. There's the talent show on May 21st, which is performed by all grades. And then there's also the Hamilton play, which is put on by our class again. And it's, yeah. Make sure to attend these.
Yes. And Miss Hirahara, if you are interested, we welcome you too. You are welcome to come and see a production of Hamilton from this 7th grade class.
I would love it. So, yeah, Eloise, have your parents forward me the link, please.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for you're taking some time away from your busy schedule and for answering our questions. It was a great experience. Thank you.
Keep writing, everybody.
Definitely. Bye.
Bye.
Have a good evening.